I'm Selena Patton, Chief of Student Services for the Charter Institute at Erskine. Welcome to Part 4 of the Institute's Educate and Elevate series, Understanding the Evaluation and ReEvaluation Process. Today's session will be led by the Institute's Director of Special Education, Laura Merrick, and we will hear from other Institute special guests who will all assist in building the understanding of these important processes. The evaluation and ReEvaluation process not only drives eligibility for students with disabilities, but most importantly, the data collection that happens in these processes leads to a better understanding of the students we serve. We are so glad you are here, and I hope you enjoy Part 4 of Educate and Elevate.
Today, we are going to take a look at the evaluation and ReEvaluation process and discuss the framework and tips to assist your teams as you lead them through this important process. Child find is the beginning of the evaluation process, so it is important we start with the understanding of child find. Child find is one of the most important special education legal obligations for schools. It is the cornerstone of the IDA, along with IEPs and parental participation, and is the foundation of FAPE. It is a requirement to locate, identify, and evaluate children who may require early intervention or special education services. Let's take a closer look at the child find continuum using this graphic you see on your screen. It begins with reasonable suspicion of a disability, which moves into obtaining consent for evaluation, which then moves into evaluation. Once the evaluation has been completed, the process moves into eligibility, which is determining classification and the need for special education services. We will simplify this process by breaking down each step. Let's begin with reasonable suspicion. So, what exactly is reasonable suspicion of a disability? The terminology reasonable can seem a bit vague. Reasonable suspicion is determining when the school has reason to suspect that a child might qualify under the essential eligibility elements of the IDA. Suspicion is based on data or evidence, not feelings. Here are some types of evidence that a team could use: classroom assessments, universal screening results, district-wide screening results, attendance records, medical reports, office referrals, other behavior data, observations, outside evaluation reports, grades, and hospitalizations. The team should collect evidence from multiple sources. This should be done within the MTSS process. It is time for a quick tip. Remember, the evaluation team may not determine that a child is eligible for special education services based solely on a medical diagnosis, as there needs to be both a disability and a need for services. So what is a reasonable period of time? Once again, the ambiguous term of reasonable is being used. Since it is not defined, it is better to err on the side of caution with the sooner the better. Once a reasonable suspicion has been determined, then the team should start making steps to convene the evaluation planning meeting. Current case law shows that this length of time to be under 2 months. Again, best practice is making efforts to convene your team to obtain parental consent for evaluation. Since these referrals will flow from the MTSS team, there needs to be a well-defined communication system between the MTSS coordinator and the SPED coordinator at the school. Before we move on to the next step, let's hear from one of our MTSS coordinators and how she works collaboratively with her SPED coordinator.
So when a student is referred for an evaluation through the MTSS process, the SPED coordinator is kind of already aware that they are headed her direction. We have very open conversations. We have a spreadsheet, so it's a live document that changes from time to time. As we believe students are headed towards an evaluation, she knows that because I'll alert her and say, I just moved this student to the spreadsheet. I believe that we're headed towards an evaluation based on MTSS data. And so we just kind of have that conversation that they're headed her way so that she can prepare, because there's a lot that comes with an evaluation between planning time with the school psychologist and the evaluation team. I want to honor her and what it takes to happen for her to schedule those meetings. Another thing that I think is really helpful is that the SPED coordinator and I are under the same leadership. And so there's already a lot of natural communication that happens between our team. And so I think that that really helps open up conversation for us because we work with the same leader and we get the same expectations and we have an understanding for one another. So there's the obvious things, like we collect the data from STAR in our universal screener. So we have benchmark data. We also like to gather DRA, reading level assessment data. And so all of that is kind of like our formal data that she would have access to anyways through STAR or through Enrich, but our schools have something called LAMPS, which is a literacy and math assessment portfolio. It's a spreadsheet that organizes everything so that we know who's in tier 2, tier 3, all of their data. When teachers do DRAs, they put that information on the spreadsheet. So I try to gather that information for her just so that she doesn't have to go hunting for it. I put it in a simple Google Doc that I share with her. And when I talk about that spreadsheet in the previous question where I let her know students are headed her way, I hyperlink the Google Doc for her that has this information for her already gathered. And another really important thing that we do as part of this process is I reach out to teachers and I ask for them to submit just anecdotal information that would be helpful to us. Anything from the child's class participation, their interactions with the student in class, anything that numbers don't tell us. And there's a lot that numbers do tell us, but there's a lot of other information that we need to know. So I like to gather that. And I also include any parent information because part of this process is me working and talking with the parent. So a lot of times I'm learning a lot about the student as I talk with the parent. So I include that in the Google document so that it's available to her. She may see that, oh, the student had tubes put in, when they were 5 years old, or they had a speech evaluation, or just little things that are helpful to create the big picture, put those puzzle pieces together. Any private evaluation reports, those are uploaded into Enrich. There are times that a student has had a private evaluation and we find those things out, through those conversations with the parents. And then we also sometimes include medical information if it pertains to what's going on and it would be helpful. We are such a big school and we've grown so much this year. And so all of our teachers and all of our advisors who are kind of like on the front lines of working with students and parents who have concerns, they have access to our Child Find, our CFQ survey. And it's just a little thing they can send me really quick with the student's name. And they put their name in it. It's a Google form. And then they put the concern that was shared. So it could be something as simple as, a child has asthma, or maybe a child has Crohn's disease or diabetes, and the teacher or advisor hears about this. So they would submit a CFQ so that we can reach out about the need for a 504. But also in the case that a parent says, I want my child evaluated, they're able to get that to me immediately. And when I get that information, I reach out to the parent and I kind of try to figure out what's going on and hear their concerns. And at that point, when I talk to the parent, there are times where the student is already identified through MTSS and they're already in tier 2 and we're already providing them with interventions. And there are other times where the parent has a request. They may say, my doctor told me to request an evaluation, or my friend told me I might want to request an evaluation. And so there are times where I can say, okay, well, let's look at the data. Let's talk about your concerns. There are times where we may say, okay, let's start the MTSS process for tier 2 and walk through that. There are other times where we look at the data and we see the student may not be meeting their parents' expectations, but is really developing and performing how they should. And so I talk about that with the parent and address those concerns. And sometimes the parent says, yes, maybe we don't, I don't really want to move forward with an evaluation. Now that I understand the data and what's going on, I feel a little bit better. And now I know that I need to work with my child on this specific skill. And then there are other times where the parent says, and I'm on the other side of the phone, feeling the same way. We probably need to move forward with an evaluation. And so whether we always move through the MTSS process simultaneously to pursuing that evaluation, but there's times where you do have to escalate it a little bit faster. And so I think that this is where my relationship with the SPED coordinator, that foundation of trust, is so important, because we trust one another and we know that we're on the same team. And we wear a hat that's very interesting. We are advocates for students who's, sometimes the students and the parents don't know how to advocate for their own rights. And in that case, we are an advocate for that child and what they need academically. And then there are other times where we have to consider that they are that general education student, and walking through that MTSS process and knowing when to escalate things. And so I think just having that relationship of trust is so important. One of the best things for our SPED coordinator and me, for the two of us to do, was when she started her position, we just kind of had a talk where we said, what do you need from me? What type of information do you need from me? What about our communication system that's in place do you think we should change? To be willing to change things mid-course and to be honest with one another. I've seen in some schools, and this isn't every school, and I've been in this position, so I understand that there are times when you see a classroom teacher who is dealing with a situation that's challenging, a student who's really struggling, and they want to push them towards the interventionist, the reading interventionist, and say, I really hope you can help this student. I can't. And then the reading interventionist feels really overwhelmed, and she pushes them towards an evaluation prematurely, okay? And they want to push that responsibility that way. And then what happens is we have students who are being evaluated prematurely. That's a concern. And if that's going on in your school, I would just encourage, whatever the situation is, to be really open and to say, let's make some changes to this. If there's a way that we're communicating that isn't working for both of you, let's make that change. For us, it seems so simple, but it really is helpful, is we have shared spreadsheets. So when it comes to students who are in the tiers and headed towards an evaluation, that's a shared spreadsheet where our SPED coordinator can look at that at any time and see who is headed her direction based on the data and based on the student's progress. Same thing for her. She has that same just transparency with me. She has shared our school psychologist schedule with me. So I can see when meetings are coming. I can see, that student who I sent her direction last week, look, she has a meeting scheduled for them with the school psychologist. So I know that initial evaluation process is going to start, 2 weeks from now. And I'm able to see that and know that it's being addressed. And if I have a question from the parent, I can go look at that spreadsheet. So we just have a lot of transparency between us. And I think that sharing those live documents is just so helpful. I think the biggest thing for me the biggest change for me was having those conversations that were just, it's almost like a define the relationship talk, of we're on the same team, we're for the students. And I've seen schools where the special ed coordinator they are so overwhelmed. They have so much going on that to have an MTSS coordinator who's like, hey, look at this referral, and this student needs to be evaluated, and this one too. You've really got to have the same goal. And I'm not saying you have to be identical, but you both just have to have that understanding of we are for the students. And if we're for the students, then we're going to be okay with taking on all the work. But how can we work best together as a team? Having that discussion was just so wonderful with our SPED coordinators. So that would be my hope for everyone and encouragement for them.
The next step is obtaining parental consent, which is done through the evaluation planning meeting. During this meeting, the team reviews all information that has been collected. This includes data from the MTSS process, as well as any outside information the parent may present. The participants of this meeting need to include all IEP members, which is your general education teacher, special education teacher, LEA, and other appropriate personnel such as the speech therapist or school psychologist. The school psychologist can assist the team in the evaluation planning process. However, it is important that the SPED coordinator is aware of how this process works. Let's take a closer look and enrich at the evaluation planning form and some helpful tips on filling out this form. In the top box on the evaluation document, you will enter the reason for the referral. You will not include all your data in this box, but simply state in broad terms the reason for the referral and some supporting evidence. An example would be, Sally is being referred for an evaluation due to concerns with her progress in the 3rd grade classroom. She has received evidence-based intervention in the MTSS process, but is still struggling, specifically with her ability to read. Additionally, her parents recently took her to the pediatrician and she was diagnosed with ADHD. In the next 12 boxes, you will include all existing information you have on the student. If the team determines additional data is needed in an area, then the additional data box is checked. It is important to ensure that you have someone at the table, usually the school psychologist, who understands the eligibility requirements in each disability area and can assist when additional data is needed in an area. There is a how-to guide located in your live binder that can assist you with how to complete this document. RTI cannot delay the referral evaluation process. When the team conducting general education interventions suspects that the child has a disability or suspects that the child may need special education services or related services, a referral for an initial evaluation must be initiated. Implementation of interventions in the general education setting cannot be used to delay the evaluation when the team suspects a disability. The RTI process can be completed at the same time the evaluation process is being conducted. Let's hear briefly from our coordinators about how they track the 60-day timeline.
I have a tracking sheet that I created at the beginning of the year, it's just a simple table, and it has all of the students' names. Then it has all of their annual reviews, a column for the annual reviews, and then it has a column for reevaluations. So at the beginning of the year, I just put their names, their dates. And then I kind of go through and like, oh, well, this one has this date, this one has, so I get kind of a game plan. I also, sometimes I use a cat, like another chart that's just a calendar. It just has the months. And then, I'll write, especially like for reevaluations, I'll write, like in the month of September, this student has one. So I just refer back to that tracking sheet. It's just simple, but that's just the way in my mind I can keep up with it in an easy chart. So, and I do periodically go through and like if they, like for instance, at the beginning of the year I have my chart, and then, a couple months later, I'll update it again, or either I'll just scratch through it and then update their new date. And then after I start scratching through, it kind of looks kind of messy, I'll rewrite it again. So
We have one tracking system for our entire K-12 model. We use Google Suite to help us stay organized. We have developed an initiation form that is accessible by all members of the school. And through that form, they are able to initiate a referral on behalf of a parent. The parents are aware of how to initiate a referral. They simply contact the homeroom teacher, and then we get that process started. They also have a direct line to me so that I can help guide that process if needed. And that's really important to have that backup plan in case we have new employees who may not be as familiar. With that form, we're able to use a Google Sheet export. And so we are able to pull exports every week. Depending on the season, it may be more often, where we can immediately check any new referrals that have come in. I do have a referral team due to the size of the school, and so each person on the team has a specific role. So what we've done is we've played to their strengths. So I have some that are very well versed in analyzing a spreadsheet, looking over information quickly, and taking next steps. I have other team members that prefer to be on the phone and having really good conversations with families about the process. We want to make sure we're educating our families while putting them through what can be lengthy. And so what we do is we pull the export and we evaluate who has come through. And then we have steps in place that involve, like I said, educating the parent, making a phone call. Within that phone call, we learn more about the student. While this is happening, a form is also sent to the gen ed teacher. And in that form, it covers a lot of those questions that you see in an eval planning or re-eval form. Those questions are very similar. So we ask about developmental stages. We ask about academic achievement and weaknesses. We look at concerns with fine and gross motor and behavior, all of them. We also ask about medical information that they may be aware of. As a virtual school, we do attract a lot of students with specific medical needs, and so we want to make sure that we're aware of everything. So that's what the gen ed teacher is doing, and then the phone call covers similar questions with the parent. And we like to have 2 layers of information going because it can be overwhelming, and we want to make sure we're crossing all T's and dotting all I's. From there, the eval planning meeting is scheduled. And we are lucky enough to have 2 school sites that we work with regularly. We have had a working relationship with them, honestly, for more years than I can count. And so we have reserved time every week at our school to hold these meetings. So we schedule the eval planning, we make sure the parent is aware, and then we follow our notification procedures. And what we're able to do if the team decides to go to testing is we then have tracking systems for consent. So we have a system in place for sending consent, to follow up on the consent if it's not received. And then we even have a contingency plan if we're not getting it. And a lot of times that'll come to me and we'll make a game plan about how to best communicate with that family to ensure that the student is going to be supported and taken care of. During the 60-day timeline process, I have a team member who, honestly, she checks those timelines every day. That is part of her job. Because we have large numbers, it's important to always review who's at play so that we're not missing anybody. And so what she does is she makes sure that evals have been requested in process. She ensures that any related service providers, such as like speech, OT, PT, that they have been secured and are on the calendar to evaluate a student. She ensures that observations are scheduled if needed and that interventions are continuing to take place with the student. We utilize Google folders, so every child has a Google folder and a secure referral folder, and teachers are able to upload updated progress monitoring data to that folder. If there are any concerns about, a student didn't show, or we're having trouble finding a provider, there's a contingency plan in place there for us to get together and, hey, let's make sure we're being proactive. I think the biggest thing that I always advise and recommend when it comes to initials is you have to be flexible in your procedures, in that certain things need to take place with certain students. And it's important to make changes and refine your systems while in process. And that's something that my team has done a very good job of doing. We have found that by using Google and having a specific, role for each member of the team has allowed us to stay compliant. We also build a plan for succession. So while it's wonderful to have a referral team, you need to always plan for the what if. Someone may be out on leave, someone may be sick. The timeline, as we know, does not stop for any of that. So we also invite other members of our special services management team. They are also certified in SPED. They participate in meetings off and on to learn the process and shadow the referral team. By doing that, we always have people in place to cover any work that, if something should arise, a conflict of some kind. So that is initials. And we have found that process is really good. When we get to eligibility, we also start involving the SPED teacher if we see that, hey, this may be headed towards qualification. And we ensure that the data starts getting collected to help develop that initial IEP along with the eval.
Once consent is signed, the team has 60 days to complete the evaluation. This is a non-negotiable timeline that is set forth in the IDA. Data is collected annually by the SCDE on this timeline through Indicator 11. The Standards for Evaluation and Eligibility Determination document, the SEED, has been designed as a companion to the South Carolina State Board of Education regulations. You can find the SEED document in your live binder. The SEED contains the standards designed to assist evaluation teams in implementing the regulation. The purpose of an evaluation is listed on your screen and must answer the following questions. Does the child have a disability that requires the provisions of special education and related services for the child to receive a free and appropriate public education? What are the child's specific educational needs? How does the child's disability affect his or her academic achievement and functional outcomes? What special education services and related services then would be appropriate for addressing these needs? It's time for a quick tip. Meeting the 60-day timeline for evaluation is paramount. Pre-planning can assist your team in this process. At the evaluation planning meeting, when all team members are at the table, go ahead and set a date to meet back for the eligibility meeting. Create the meeting invite for the eligibility in Enrich and give to the parent at this time. Let's hear some helpful tips from a school psychologist.
So we definitely want to make sure that, the child has been, when we're looking at SLD, that they've been receiving scientifically based instruction in reading or math, whatever the area is. And that they've had intervention to target that weakness. And so that is a key piece. We also want to see that it isn't, a lack of limited English proficiency. And we want to also see that the child has been receiving instruction based on state standards. So, for example, if a child has been homeschooled or not been attending school for large periods of time, this is something that we have to look at, and so can pose a problem for looking at eligibility, a significant problem. So we need to try to understand what's going on there. And then we want to also have multiple forms of data that support that there is a disability. So that's looking at the interventions and how they did with that. looking at, also the achievement measures, cognitive measures, those sorts of things. That's another form of data. Looking at other screening assessments, progress monitoring. So looking at all of those things is important when we're looking at SLD. Staying connected with the coordinator and the school psychologist, I think I've had the most luck, or things have gone the best when we stay in some kind of communication, and even texting, about things. This is coming up, what do you think about this? I need help here. I think that really makes the process go smoothly, not getting upset about things, but just communicating and trying to, figure out what to do and solve the problem.
The next step in the process after evaluation is classification. For this step, you will use the SEED document to assist the team in determining eligibility. Within Enrich, there are eligibility worksheets for the 13 disability categories that assist in this process. If the team is suspecting a disability in one of these categories, then the eligibility worksheet is completed. You can see on your screen an example of the specific learning disability worksheet. There is a two-pronged test in determining eligibility. The team first must ensure that the child meets the definition of one of the categories of disability and, as a result of the disability, needs special education and related services. If a child meets the definition of a disability category but does not need special education and related services, he or she cannot be determined eligible under the IDA. If the child has a need for special education services and related service but does not meet the definition of a disability category, he or she cannot be determined eligible. In the case of a child who is found to have a disability but does not need special education and related services, a referral to the 504 team should be considered. Now let's take a peek into the reevaluation process. Reevaluations are required every 3 years or more often to determine if the child continues to be a child with a disability and needs special education or related services, the educational needs of the child, the present levels and academic functional performance, and whether additional modifications or services are needed to meet annual goals and to participate, if appropriate, in the general education curriculum. Here are a few examples of when a reevaluation might be conducted outside the 3-year triennial. Prior to determining if the child no longer is a child with a disability, if a related service is being dropped from the IEP, such as OT, speech, or counseling, a parent brings in an outside evaluation, or a parent requests a reevaluation, and if the child is aged 3 to 9 is determined eligible as a child with DD, a reevaluation must be conducted before the child turns 10 to determine whether a child continues to be a child with a disability as defined by any of the categorical areas under the law and whether the child continues to need special education services. This must be completed prior to the 10th birthday. Can you think of some other examples? Type them in the chat box now. It's time for another quick tip. Carefully evaluate the student's records to determine if additional data is needed during the reevaluation, paying close attention to when the last full evaluation was completed. If a student has not received a reevaluation in multiple cycles, such as an 11th grade student that has not been evaluated since 2nd grade, then the team should collect additional data. Now let's take a deeper look into some individual case examples. In this situation, a speech-only student is ready for dismissal, but currently has additional IEP services provided by the resource teacher. Take a few seconds to think about this. What should you do? The IEP team would need to meet and convene a reevaluation to gather additional data. If the student is dismissed from speech, which is the only disability area for this student, then the student would no longer have an IEP and receive the other services listed on the IEP. The team would need to determine if the student qualifies for services under another disability category. Okay, next example. A speech-only student is in RTI for reading, and the IEP team wants to add a goal for reading, which would be served by the resource teacher. What should you do? Or can you do this? This would be a time that you should conduct a reevaluation. As previously discussed, the use of RTI strategies cannot be used to delay or deny the provisions of a full individual evaluation, and the team should determine the additional needs of the student and address appropriately. Next, let's look at the steps that need to be taken within Enrich for reevaluations. First, you need to schedule the meeting and review all existing data. It is important to be prepared before the meeting with all relevant data, which can include past evaluations, information from parents, current assessment, classroom-based observations, response to interventions, and any updated medical information. After each area that is being reviewed, the team must determine if additional data is needed. If the team determines that additional data is needed in a particular area, then the box is checked yes. Make sure these areas are reflected within the PWN. At the conclusion of the meeting, the team can determine a date to meet back and review the results. This must be prior to the 3-year reevaluation date. At the end of the evaluation form, make sure to check Consent Received, Evaluation Eligibility. Remember, every reevaluation should be approached and designed individually based on a specific concern of the child being evaluated. A variety of tools can be utilized to gather information. Also, as the special education coordinator, you should feel comfortable and be able to complete the reevaluation process and know when you need to call in your school psychologist. If the student does not need additional data collected, then you can complete the process without the school psychologist. Let's hear from some of our coordinators about some of the data they use when they are completing the reevaluation in Enrich and how they prepare for reevaluation meetings.
Start them early. That would probably be my best advice to someone is do not wait to the last minute. And especially if you feel like you're going to need additional information because you never know what could come up. They could, fail their vision screening and then you're having to wait on, vision or, doctors, if they're OHI or something like that, you have to wait on the doctors to send those different things. Especially if you need testing, I would not wait to the last minute. However, sometimes kids come to you and they are last minute, but if you can possibly do them in advance, do them in advance. As far as preparation, I try to look at the whole child. It's not just a simple what are they doing in their classroom? I mean, yes, that's very important. What are they doing in Gen Ed? What are they doing, towards their IEP goals? But you need to look at the whole child. I like to start at the beginning. I love to go back and I like to look at their previous reevaluation reports. What led them into special ed? Have they always been in special ed? And I like to see the progression of it. Hopefully and ideally, if they were in special ed at a young age, you can tell that they have progressed all these years. So it's a lot of I wrote down some notes. Knowing your students, that's a big, I've seen some evaluations and I've done them before, when I didn't really know a student. I remember one time I was in a class or just at a school and unfortunately their reevaluation review was like a month in when we get in. Well, I didn't know the kids, so I really had to dig in, to their previous and look at their information. Talk to your Gen Ed teachers. If that student is in Gen Ed, they see that student probably more than you do, depending on how many service minutes they have. So, talk to their teachers. What are they doing in those Gen Ed classrooms? Getting their feedback. Because we can suggest all kinds of different information, services, accommodations, but, sometimes we suggest them and they're not needed. Or, they'll come up with something like, I have to do this, this, and this, and this, and we haven't thought about it. I'm like, oh, I can make that, that could be an accommodation that would probably help that student in all these other classes. So just gathering as much information as you can. And I think putting pertinent information in there.
I like to utilize Google Forms to start out with. A lot of our teachers will send surveys home to parents. Again, we're virtual, and so we want to make sure that we're having intentional, purposeful conversations with parents. So it starts with a survey, and my teachers who are well equipped in ReEvals utilize them. And what they do is they send them home through our internal email system, and they ask questions that are very similar to what we do in our initial process. They ask about any updated medical concerns that we may not be aware of. What does learning look like at home? Where do you see the strengths and concerns? What that does is that sets the tone for a really good conversation with the parent about how things are currently going. They also ask programming questions, as a reminder, hey, here's the services and accommodations that we're working with right now. Here's what we're seeing on our end. What are you seeing at home? This not only helps us gather additional information on the students, it's a great way to build that relationship with that parent. We've trained our staff to kind of pick out red flags in conversations. So if we start hearing about speech concerns, or we start hearing about what might be a behavioral concern, we can dive a little bit deeper, and we can do so ahead of time. We have a system in place for our teachers to request a school psych for a meeting. We also have systems in place for them to request specific providers who may need to attend. And that's our big preparation. We do require that draft copies are completed ahead of time. We like to have a draft plan in place, and our parents appreciate that as well, because then they have at least 2 days at a minimum to kind of look at what we'll talk about. Nothing's set in stone. They know it's a draft, but they can say, okay, here's what we're going to review as a team. And here's the questions I have. And we have found that to be really beneficial, really for everybody involved, so that they can be a more active team member during the meeting. We have kind of monitored and adjusted with this over the years. And what we have learned is that our case managers are very capable of holding these meetings. In our school, we have teachers from all over the state who have been in brick and mortar settings. Some of us, including myself, came from situations where we always held them. We didn't know that there might be other options out there. And then we have employees where they've never held a reeval. That's always been the school psych, or like you just mentioned, the coordinator. And so we decided in our setting, because there's such a strong connection between the case manager and the family, we don't want to take away from that. So the case manager leads the reeval meeting. Our LEAs are trained in what a reeval meeting is and what to expect. We do the 4-month timeline for preparing, because that's when we start diving deep on, gosh, do we need to consider additional information? Any kind of red flag that comes up with that, we invite the school psych, and we have them come in, or any other provider who may not currently be involved. That way we know that they can be there, we know that we can get their input, and then the recommendations are sound for team agreement. And so that seems to work best in our setting. I think that when you are working for us with a large group of adults, everyone has a different learning style. So in the past, we have had what I call cheat sheets, like here's the different steps you'll take, for enrich and during the meeting. This year we started incorporating screencastify, where we do a recording that can then be saved for our handbook. So that way, if you go through a verbal training, they can always go back and watch a recording later, because you can train all day, but if it's not something that's impacting you right then and there, you're probably, human nature, you probably won't remember. And then what we've learned this year is because we have grown our staff and we have a lot of new people, we know that next year, we've kind of already done it this year, but also next year, we want to do more specific trainings about specific issues. So we want to do, okay, let's talk about annuals and what the expectations are. Let's talk about reevals and what the expectations are. This year, we've done a lot of one-on-one training as kids have come up. And we are able to do that because we do have a management team, and every teacher at our school is assigned essentially a special education specialist who can help them, with a specific case. We also do recorded trainings, and we have found too that surveying our staff throughout the year on what is going well and what is not, essentially a pulse survey, we do those quarterly. That helps tremendously for us to see, okay, where are they comfortable and where aren't they? And if reevals come up, we revisit it and talk about, different scenarios that can come up. I think really the biggest hurdle we face when it comes to reevals is oftentimes just empowering our educators. You're able to do this. You may not have done it before, but look, you talk about all this information all the time. It's just in a different kind of worksheet. So really it's just promoting that teacher leadership and demonstrating to them that they can hold the meeting, and we've found that it's gone really well. So
the evaluation and reevaluation process is one of the cornerstones of the IDA. As the SPED coordinator, you should understand the process and the different components associated with it. Today, we discussed the Child Find Continuum from the reason to suspect a disability through evaluation and into identification. We also reviewed the reevaluation process and heard from a number of our coordinators. I want to thank you for joining us today to discuss the evaluation and reevaluation process. Please join us next month for our session titled Leading the Way, Implementing High-Quality Instructional Practices.